Hello everyone. So this webinar is all about proven methods for elevating end-to-end tracking in Azure or hybrid integrations. So in typical cloud scenario, organizations are using complex Azure or most of the times hybrid integration solutions to complete their business flow. But the real problem they face with this particular method is visualizing the flow of messages across distributed resources. Few attempt to address this by utilizing different native tools like log analytics or application insights, but this approach can get problematic as it requires deep expertise in each of these tool sets. And for a non-technical expert, this becomes even more complex to have this complete visualization. So that's where Serverless 360 BAM comes in. So today we have Michael Stephenson with us who would present a real-time examples with similar Azure or hybrid scenarios to clearly explain how effective or how easy it is to do an end-to-end tracking with Serverless 360 BAM. And about the speaker, Michael Stephenson. Michael Stephenson is a freelance cloud specialist, architect, and a coach who has worked consistently with enterprise customers delivering production workloads using Microsoft Azure since it was in preview. So he has a great experience in Azure for over 3 decades, and he has been a Microsoft MVP since 2008. So Michael has also led organizations who has a deep adoption in Azure tech stack, and he has worked with multiple industries like finance, healthcare, higher education, and SM. So let us hear it from Michael Stephenson. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Sri. Morning, everybody. Welcome to this session. So we're going to be talking about end-to-end tracking for Azure and hybrid integrations. So this is a really similar session to the integrated session, but we had a lot of great feedback. People wanting to know more about it, about all these different examples. So what we decided to do was to have a webinar today where it would be a little bit less formal than integrated, a little bit more personal, and we'd have the opportunity to deeper dive into some of the scenarios. And then the demos that we produced were also in the process of producing a playlist on YouTube where we can take each individual scenario and deep dive into each of them. So we'll have like a sort of 20-30 minute video on each scenario where you can learn like a much lower level of detail about how to do them. So we hope this will really help people how to do these real world tracking scenarios with BAM. So my background, I think this is wrong. I think it's 15 years now. So a lot of people just got renewed. I was fortunate enough to get renewed for the 15th year as an MVP, which is quite cool and quite scary at the same time. I'm a freelance cloud architect, but I'm also a product advisor for Serverless 360. So what that means is I help Saravana with strategy around what features would be good for customers in the product based on my field experience. And I also talk to customers for Kovai about how you can implement Serverless 360, what value it offers, and how you can be successful with it. I blog quite a lot, so my blog link's there. I also do a lot of YouTube videos. So one thing people might be interested in is I've been doing a YouTube series about where to use which technology if you're developing Azure integration solutions, which I've had loads of really great feedback from. So if you're into that topic area, please check that out. Today we're going to talk about Microsoft Azure Integration Services solutions. So if we take an example of what does this stack look like, this diagram's a good representation of all of the different technologies that make up the Azure Integration Services suite. And I think that this is a really important diagram because a lot of the times people think of logic apps or they think of functions or Power Automate, and they tend to think of them as their own isolated thing and they don't think of the bigger picture, where if you're developing real world solutions at scale where you're doing, you're a company doing not just 1 or 2 integrations, but you've got 100 or 200 integrations, the chances are you're going to be using a lot of the things on this screen. And this is really, where this YouTube series I did about where to use what. This is really what this is about, is making the decisions around how to combine these technologies to be successful. Now, what that leads to is that you can build great solutions, but the problem becomes, right, you've built it, how do you run it? So how do you operate it in the real world to be successful, to minimize the problems that you have? And with that scenario of minimizing the problems, tracking becomes one of the important sort of patterns that you need to think about. How are you going to do this? So how are you going to track data flowing across the fact that, well, I've got an API management, I've got a logic app, and I've got a data factory pipeline. So these things work together to solve one of my use cases. How do I have a holistic view of what's happening across those three technologies? But then the next interface comes along and you're using API management, logic apps and functions and Cosmos. So it might be a completely different type of solution, but it uses some of the same resources, but you still have that challenge of that end-to-end tracking. Now, in the Microsoft suite on the diagram over here, we've got Azure Monitor, App Insights, Log Analytics that make up part of the management and monitoring capabilities. And we know that there's some good features in there, but as a company, what we found is from building our own cloud solutions, from the experience of our consultants in the field, and then also from customer feedback, we find that customers get so far with the technologies offered by Azure out of the box, but it's not where they want to get to. So Microsoft would get you, let's for argument's sake say 70% of the way there. Customers need to get to 90 to 100%, and that's where, as a product, Serverless 360 is trying to fill that gap, that last couple of miles to get you to where you need to be. So this is where we feel Serverless 360 fits in this box. Within this box, we've got a number of features that we'll come on to in a second. Okay, so the use case or the challenge that Serverless 360 is attempting to address is this problem of, we have a bunch of solutions in production. In this example, we're talking about Azure integration, but it could be websites, it could be APIs, it could be event-driven architectures and a whole bunch of different types of solutions. It comes back to the same core problem, is that every time you have a support issue, the business user can't do anything with it. The Azure portal is too complicated for your support team who don't have enough experience. All of your support tickets end up going to the developer or the Azure expert to be able to do anything meaningful with them. That takes time to get stuff sorted out, and it costs money to get stuff sorted out. So the idea is, if we can move any of the support that we can move this way, we think that's a win for the customer, and that's the kind of underlying principle of Serverless 360. So in Serverless 360, we've got 4 modules. We've got Business Apps, Cost Analyzer, Business Activity Monitoring, and Documenter. Business Apps is about day-to-day running of the solution. Cost Analyzer is about trying to help you have a cost-focused culture and think about efficiently spending money. Document is about generation of documentation to automate those low-value tasks, but also to give you the requirements for compliance and auditing. And then today we're going to talk about Business Activity Monitoring. So this is about how can we let you go from the concept of managing a logic app, a function, an API, to the higher abstraction of managing an order, managing an employee onboarding, and managing the business transaction instead of the technical component. And that's where we think we can get a lot of wins here, where we can get tickets getting resolved straight away by business users. So we can have self-service. So this on the diagram, this is our BAM portal here. We've also got business applications, which is represented there. But with the BAM portal, we can have business users who can self-service, check if an order was received, check if it got an error. Maybe they can fix data in a system. If a customer's not set up right in your CRM system, you might not be able to load an order, so they can fix that. And they can potentially be allowed to reprocess a message. You can have your support users can use BAM to see what's going on and ideally fix a lot of these day-to-day issues. If you come from an integration background, that most of the time the integration platform is the best error logging platform, because it tells you everything wrong in all of your other systems. So they go and fix the problem in the system, replay the integration, and that fixes most of your issues. So you can see where target is to get all of these tickets away from the developer, so they can focus on building new apps. So Business Activity Monitoring, we've got a bunch of tooling aimed at these support people and business self-service, aimed to let them track and trace integration runs, to see what's going on, to have out-of-the-box monitoring capabilities, and just empower these users to participate in your support process. So we're going to go through a series now of different demos. We're going to look at an example architecture. We're going to talk about the business problem, and then we're going to look at how BAM gets implemented in that scenario and how, what the value you get out of Serverless 360. So we've got a requirement to build an employee onboarding process. So an employee joins as a new hire. The HR system gets that user, kind of reaches the stage, or that employee reaches the stage of they've joined the company. And then we have multiple integrations to each of the destination systems. You might also have scenarios. This is based on a real world project I've worked on. The idea is you might also have the HR system gets updated with a person's name change or an address change or something like that. You can cascade that out to different systems. Now, the challenge here is that because a lot of systems need to be aware of employees, how can you track and trace and troubleshoot whether there's been a problem processing that user's update? So the architecture that we built looks a bit like this. So we had SuccessFactors was the HR system. We had an interface over here that pulls SuccessFactors for changes. So we have a logic app that runs on a trigger, queries SuccessFactors via an API, publishes it to Service Bus. This is where we get the pub sub capability. So in this case, I'm looking at the new employee onboarding, so the new hire, but we could have updates that might pub sub to other interfaces. But when you first join, we need to do a number of things. So we're trying to build micro integrations here that do specific jobs. So we're trying to build a process where the new hire starts. We have user creation, where we use APIM logic apps and functions to process that data, transform it, do certain calculations on it, and then we're updating Active Directory here to create the user. Once that new hire has an Active Directory account, we can then publish to Service Bus that can trigger other interfaces. So I'm actually missing a line off my diagram here. So that user might need groups to be set up so we can integrate into Active Directory. This one's quite interesting because we have mailbox activation. So when a user gets created, there needs to be some PowerShell that gets run to configure Exchange for that user's mailbox. So here, rather than just do an API-based integration, we can have a logic app that triggers from Service Bus, runs a PowerShell automation runbook that goes and drives Exchange. We then have updates to the learning system, the benefit system, and you can see these are all classic Azure integrations. Now, if you think of that point of a new user gets created, the thing is we've got these little small integrations that are easy to change, easy to to update if there's some bug or some new enhancement. But the problem is the trade-off is that we have this sort of fragmented view. So each of these is separate logic apps, separate functions. How do you see what's going on across the board? So this is where Serverless 360 kicks in. So what we can do here is we can implement BAM in our solution. So we have BAM events going from these micro interfaces where they basically say, I've received a message, I'm doing this with it, I've updated my system, everything's good. Or they may say there was a problem, here's the details about the error. So once we have this data coming into BAM, this is where we can start creating up here this holistic view that we can let our HR people can actually go into BAM and they could look and see, all right, Mike just joined as a new employee. Did he get updated in all the systems? And we can get that view nicely in BAM. So this is where I'm going to jump into the portal here and show what this looks like. So here we've got Serverless 360. Here we've got the 4 modules of Serverless 360. In the business activity monitoring area, so this is where we've got a number of really cool things. So first off, on the left, this is where I can configure my tree view that represents my business processes. So you might model, we've got COVI, we've got different departments, and one of them would be the HR department. So here I've got the container for a number of business transactions. So this is what we refer to as a business process. And then over in the transaction area, this is where I'd define what my transactions would look like. So if we take new hire to Active Directory, so this is the first one. Let's just go back to the diagram a minute. This is this one over here, this create user. We're looking at that as our new hire to Active Directory. So here we might have a logic app that might have a significant number of shapes in it that the developer really cares about, but the support user and the business self-service user, the problem is that 100 logic app shapes is way too complicated for them to understand that interface and do anything useful with it. So what we can do in BAM is we can create this simplification of the process. So here we're just saying we received a message, we looked up to see if they're an existing user. Obviously, if you've already got that user in AD, you don't want to duplicate. We then look up their manager, we create the user, and the process is complete. So you can see here I've indicated that these are all sections in logic apps. So if we look at the edit here, I could just add a new stage here, and it's really just a case of you give it a name. We'll say this is a BizTalk stage as an example, and that would be how you would add a new stage to your diagram. Now, the idea here is this simplification of what's going on to make it easy for the business user to see this process. I think all of these steps here are well understood, and what you might do is say these are the common milestones in this business transaction. These are the things where we may commonly get errors. So for example, a good one we had in this was the manager lookup. If we had a manager ID that hadn't been set up correctly in Active Directory, the manager lookup might fail, so we can let the business user know the manager wasn't correct. They get a data update to the manager, and then they can reprocess the user. Create would be a good example. Now, once we've created our business transactions here, over in the tracking view, this is where we can start seeing what's going on. So what we would have done at this point, and we'll look at this in a little bit more detail in a minute, is we've got business events coming from the logic apps in this case. Here you can see at the top, we've got an example of Cyril, who's he's got a few transactions going through here. So he's got his add user to groups at the top. And then down here, he's got his activate mailbox, and then here he's got his new hire to Active Directory. We could do a search for Cyril, and we could just get this holistic view of what's everything that happened to Cyril. So I'm just going to grab his ID here as an example. I can go into the search, and there's my view of all of the transactions that we've processed for Cyril. So that's that holistic view across all of those different interfaces. And what I'm able to do, so because I can make the data look friendly for the user, so I can promote things like, if you imagine in Logic App, you can send the message body, you can send a dictionary of headers, but you can also define properties in Serverless 360 directly. So here I can say to the user, we've got the add user to group. The business might know that, it goes from Service Bus to Active Directory, Service Bus to Exchange, Success Factors to Service Bus. They're fairly easy concepts for the business super user to be explained to, rather than having the lower level detail, which might be too complicated. Now here, if we click the new hire to Active Directory, this is the one we looked at in the designer. So I can see this transaction, it's green on the left because it worked, and we can see the steps that we went through, and then I can actually click a step. I can see the metadata here about the step. We've got some properties down the bottom, and I can also save a message body if I wanted to. So here's the message body that would have triggered that interface. So maybe in that case, it's a message that said, go and create this new user based on that trigger from Success Factors. Now, the logical question people in the audience probably have right now is, right, how do I get this data from Logic Apps to Business Activity Monitoring? So over in my demos here, so I've got this resource group has my Active Directory demos in. So if we go new hire to Active Directory, now I guess without going into too much detail, we made some design decisions with BAM about whether we pull tracking data from Azure or we let you push data to us. We made the decision to provide an API for BAM where you can tell us what's happening. Now, the reason for that predominantly is a couple of things. So firstly, Microsoft changed a lot of the tracking data behind the scenes. So if you think over the years, you've got different components like Function Apps has App Insights, APIM has App Insights, Logic App Standard had Log Analytics integration, and Logic App Standard has App Insights. They're all good, but they're all missing a couple of things. So number one, they don't always have the message body, or they might have a subsection of the message body in APIM's case. But Logic Apps doesn't record message bodies into Log Analytics. Number two is you get a huge volume of login data versus, so you might find that 99.9% of the log events you don't care about from a BAM perspective. So the cost of processing those events is quite prohibitive when you only need 1 in 100,000 events. So it becomes much simpler and much more effective if the events are pushed to tell us what you want to tell us in BAM. And that means it becomes much easier to implement. However, the trade-off is you have to use our action. So here we've got the start transaction action in our Logic app, where you can just tell us, here's a transaction that starts, it's this business process, it's this stage, here's the data. It's as simple as adding the connector. And that basically would start a new transaction, give me all the data, and then later on you can see here I've got a checkpoint for the manager lookup. So I'm just saying, right, we've reached the stage now where the manager lookup happened. Again, I can pass some data. For this time, the data is coming from that APIM call. And then I can say down here, it's complete. Now, depending on the technology that you're using, in this case, we're looking at a Logic app. If you were doing a function, we have .NET libraries that you can use. Any technology that you can make an HTTP call with, you can call out to BAM. And that's really the point of today, is that we're going to look at a couple of different demos where we use BAM from different technologies to show how it can be used. So here, with a couple of connectors being added, you go from having this fragmented view where you've got logs across different Logic apps that are really hard to bring together and create a meaningful view. You've now got this holistic view of here's what happened to Cyril when that user got set up as a new user. Now, because we've got this view coming in of all this data, we've got the ability to go and track in here. This opens up a number of significantly useful features in BAM that you just wouldn't get with the login. So with Serverless 360, if you think I said Microsoft gets you part of the way there, we're trying to fill the gap. And this is really where we're trying to add value on top of what the login gives you. So one of the things we want to be able to do, let's say Cyril had an error. So if he had an error, it would show up here. I might have a user who's configured to reprocess. So this is where I can go to this reprocess button. In this case, I want to send the message back to Service Bus. So I can confirm the reprocess there. So that got resubmitted, that'll go again. Now my Logic app, just a caveat, my Logic app trigger, just to reduce the cost of my demo, it only triggers every 5 minutes or so. So I'm just gonna force the trigger to go and check Service Bus. We should see that message got picked up here. It starts getting processed and we'll see a new message for Cyril appear in BAM in a few minutes there. So we'll just let that run. You can see down the bottom here, the reprocess tag is one of the things we also do. So when you're working through issues, one of the problems with Login is it's kind of read-only. So your components can write to the log, but the question is, you've dealt with an error. How do you know you've dealt with it? So a couple of things that we do in this space are here, because I've reprocessed this message, tag that transaction so you know that you've reprocessed it. If we said that this user had an error, but we fixed it directly in the end system, so we don't need to do anything with this, I could actually put it like ignore the transaction, give a reason. So I can just put a made up reason here, and you can see this transaction's now marked as ignored, and you can see the reason we chose to ignore it. And that's really about managing these errors and kind of getting your to-do list done. Now, we should see there's Cyril's new transaction in process at the minute, so you can see he's partway through. There's a bit of a delay shape in this Logic app run, so I think it takes a minute or two for that whole thing to finish. Now, from going back to the to-do list, one of the things you might do is go to action required. So I don't know if I've actually had any genuine errors in this demo, so we might look at the main. Oh, there we go. That's good. So what action required is about is here's the errors that you haven't sorted out yet. So when I reprocess or if I ignore, if an error will then go away from the to-do list. So if we look at this one here, we can see our user lookup failed. We had some kind of error here. I can, as you can see here, I've got a message body now. I can promote message bodies with errors, and if I wanted to ban as well, it's really about you telling us what you want the user to see at this point in time. So we won't just show a dirty error message that might reveal sensitive info. It's you tell us what you want the error message to look like. Now, in here, the user can then come and reprocess, or in this case, I'll go, right, now what I might do is I might mark it as a favorite. So I might say I'm going to lunch, I'll mark this as a favorite and I'll come back and deal with it later. So I should see this on my, I think it was about 7 days ago, that error. So I'll see this on my favorite list. I can choose to assign it to another user. So let's say I'm working with Sri Harry and I say, right, can you go and have a look at this issue and go and sort it out because I'm off tomorrow, so I can assign it and it'll show up on Sri Harry's list. Or let's say in this case I choose to ignore it. That'll take it away from my action required list because I've dealt with it. So this is really the to-do. What have you got left to do to get this healthy? But then it'll show up in the history still as having been ignored. So that's really about track and trace. Next up, we've got dashboards. So dashboards are about showing an overview of what's going on. So you'll get an out-of-the-box dashboard with a bunch of widgets on it to let you see the health of this business process. But you can also add your own widgets. So I added this widget at the bottom to give me how many messages per day. You can very easily customize that. In the interest of time, I'll let people kind of, we've got more videos about this kind of thing. I want to focus on the examples today. We also have monitoring, so I can monitor a business process. In addition, in our other module business apps, you monitor the resources. Here we're monitoring the business process. So you can see I've had a bunch of issues previously, so that this one we'll look at in a second. You can see the history of all these different incidents I've had. Now, one of the things that I can do, we've just done a video about this recently, so I'll just mention it but not go into it too much. Duration monitoring. So in my example of this one about the activate mailbox, so in the real world we had a scenario where the PowerShell script takes quite a while to run sometimes. So that's a common scenario that people have in the real world. Is I've got an integration, it usually takes 10 minutes to run. Sometimes it takes half an hour, 2-3 hours, and then it may or may not error. The problem is if it's just taking a long time to run, how does that alert to you to tell you there's a problem? So you don't really get anything out of the box to do that, and it means you've got a problem you're just not going to know till later on. So what we can do in duration monitoring is we can configure, so down here my activate mailbox, but a step called PowerShell activation, where I've just said if this stage runs more than 12 minutes, raise a warning, more than 14, raise an error. And here I've chosen to put a bit of advice on the email that the user's going to get, so I can, again, this is taking it to the next level, is not just tell the alert, but also give advice on how the user can deal with this issue so that the notification will tell you that. We have exception monitoring. So here we have the scenario of if a transaction fails or get an exception, you can configure it to raise alerts in that scenario. So you can have roll-ups if you want to minimize the number of alerts if you might get a lot of errors. You've got an escalation policy here where you can define if nobody deals with this issue, what do you want to do with it? And then finally, you can configure different channels. So you can configure notification channels for things like ServiceNow, PagerDuty, Teams, Outlook, and a whole bunch of different scenarios for notification channels. So you'll raise a notification that there's a problem. And then the final monitoring bit is query monitoring. So here we have the idea that you build a query, we'll check that query periodically, and based on the results of the query, we'll raise an error. So This brings in a really interesting scenario. Again, this add value on top of the platform. Let's pretend I've got a scenario where I have an interface that runs once a day. If it gets an error, that's fine, I get an alert. But what if it doesn't run? So that's a real world common problem. If it doesn't run, then no error happened. How would you ever know there was a problem? Now, this is where you could do a query that says, I expect at least one run of this transaction every day. If it doesn't happen, then we can raise an alert. So I've used that for things like I've had rail cars getting filled in the petrochemical plant with product, and then they go shipping out to the transport yard. In that scenario, we had if we didn't get a message for about 4 or 5 hours, there might be a potential problem. So we can monitor for that and jump in and deal with it. Because if that interface fails or it spends a long period of time not processing data, then it can cause big problems. So that's really the monitoring. Now, a couple of features we've added recently that are pretty interesting. So we've got this container of a business process. We also have groups here in the tree. So let's imagine that you want to be able to see, I think actually finance, I don't know if I've got one with multiple processes. But let's imagine I've got 2 or 3 different business processes in HR. We added the ability for you to be able to configure querying across business processes. So if I go and do a new search here, you can see if I had multiple business processes, this would give me a view of everything that happened across HR. So one example might be I've got my person sync, but I might also have pay interfaces. So if I want to see everything that happened to Mike, I could go and do a search for Mike's ID, and I could see holistically across all of my business processes everything that happened to Mike, which I think is really cool. Okay, so that's the Logic app demo. What I really want to do is spend a bit more time on that demo to begin with, to show you all of those key features in Serverless 360 that add value on top of basic login. So we've gone from having fairly raw logs that you can query in Azure. We've now got business self-service. We've got rich holistic views across our business transactions. We've got to-do management. We've got much richer monitoring and a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, how do we use that in other technologies? So here we've got a data platform. So we've gone from Logic apps. We're now processing big data scenarios. The requirement is that the business user is going to upload some configuration to SharePoint. Logic apps copies it to Data Lake. We have jobs in Synapse that run and process the data. And then what happens is the user goes into SharePoint to see the output report that Synapse produced. And there's no data or there's no file at the end of the day. And the user's like, well, there's no file here. What happened? I don't know. They raise a support ticket. They say, my daily report's not there. That goes to the support desk who can't do anything. It goes to the level 2. It goes then to the developers who actually know how Synapse works, and they go and look in and troubleshoot a pipeline and find out something broke. Now, what this might look like is we've got, I'm just going to go to my next slide a second. We've got Logic apps, and user uploads the input and configuration for the report over here. That syncs down to the data lake through Logic apps. So we've already talked about how we can have Logic apps pushing data to BAM. We've then got event data coming into the data lake, and we've got big data ingestion from various line of business applications via Synapse pipelines. So what happens is this data lake ends up with data from all of these different sources, and then we have Synapse pipelines and Spark jobs will process and act on that data, go from the raw data in the landing zone, we'll create standardized data sets, and then the next Synapse pipeline copies it to the data warehouse, and then we've got Power BI over here creating the data warehouse. Or I think that I might have sort of slightly different examples. So let's imagine we've also got SharePoint, and the Synapse pipeline might also copy files out of SharePoint. So if we stick with the example I talked about. Now, the problem we have is, right, maybe this file here that the business user inputted into SharePoint provides configuration data that Synapse uses to process the data that came in. And so let's say they upload a sales forecast every month or something like that. That then's key to processing the actual data to get this output report. Now, if this user didn't upload this Excel file into SharePoint, this bit over here might go bang, and that's where you don't end up with either the data in your Power BI report or your output SharePoint report. So this is the problem with this, this complex business process, is that some issue, let's go back to this issue here where it wasn't an error, there was nothing broke here. It's just this user didn't upload that month's sales forecast. Therefore, 20 steps later on, this bit over here went bang, and we didn't get the data. So it might even be, in the real world, it wouldn't be uncommon. It was the same user here, looks at the Power BI report or looks at SharePoint and goes, oh, my data doesn't appear. Let's raise a support ticket. It escalates. The support team come and look at this and go, well, this pipeline broke. Why did it break? Boom, 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 trace it back, and they go, oh, you never uploaded the file in the first place. So what we can do is all of these Synapse pipelines can also send events to serverless 360. So we'd be able to give the user holistic tracking across the whole thing. So what we can do there is that, the user who didn't see the report over here, we'll draw a little unhappy face because there's no data. They can go to serverless 360 through self-service, and they can actually see, they'd see this pipeline was an error, they'd see this was an error, they might actually reprocess. If you want to give them the ability to just re-trigger the pipelines doable. And they can see where things have gone wrong, and they might even be able to fix their own problems. So if they realize that, with a small amount of coaching, you might be able to say, oh, there's a really common problem where you forget to do this. So they can go and check that and just fix it themselves. But also you could even have the thing in serverless 360 where this bit about this interface didn't run, therefore serverless 360 could have raised an alert here to say, by this time we didn't receive that file, therefore we know that you're probably going to have a problem. And that's the system telling the user to fix the problem, and they do before it happens, and you never got the support ticket in the first place. That would be the win here. Now, if we go and have a look at Synapse, so I'm just going to jump back to serverless a minute. So here in my transport area, this is where I've got some of my Synapse demos. So here I've got one where you can see, in this case, I'm just copying data from Synapse to a Railcar database. So it's a slightly different example, but I think the previous slide's a really good way to explain the problem and how this works. But what I can do here is I can click and I can see my pipeline run, and I can click on the details and I can see things like the source and destination systems, and I can even have properties like what was the name of the pipeline, what was the run ID. So I've got traceability back to Synapse. Now the question is really, how do you get from Synapse to BAM? So I'm just going to go into my MSDN over here. Sri, do we have any questions, by the way, at this point while I'm opening this up?
Yes, Meg, we have one question. So how does serverless 360 BAM and atomic scope compare for monitoring or integration flows?
Yeah, it's a great question.
They just wanted to monitor only the integration flow, so just wanted to compare serverless 360 BAM and atomic scope.
Yeah, so I guess a bit of background for everybody is Kovai has more than just one product. So we're talking about serverless 360 today. Historically, Kovai, the first product we produced was called BizTalk 360. which was aimed at BizTalk customers. It's kind of conceptually the equivalent of Serverless 360, but for BizTalk. One of the modules, or one of the products we then built, was Atomic Scope, which was aimed at providing business activity monitoring features for BizTalk users, so that, back in BizTalk days, customers, you could do business activity monitoring with BizTalk, but it was a really limited feature set. It had some gaps and wasn't the prettiest UI, so we kind of built a complete product to that. What we're finding is that there's two scenarios. So firstly, there's customers who have needs for business activity monitoring who've never been BizTalk customers. So these are customers who might be Power Automate users, they might be functions, they might be Data Factory, they might never have had BizTalk or Logic apps. Likewise, we've got cloud first companies where they don't have BizTalk, but they're doing Azure integration services. And then we also have customers doing BizTalk to Azure integration services migrations. So I think that the customers who might have Atomic Scope are going to be from that BizTalk background. We see those customers doing phased migrations away from BizTalk to Azure integration services, and with Serverless 360. So we think that you're likely to be using Serverless 360 BAM from the new stuff that you build for Logic apps. We're also offering a BizTalk add-on for Serverless 360, so you can send BAM events to Serverless 360 from BizTalk to help with those migrations. Now, with Atomic Scope, so I'm going to just caveat that I'm not part of the product team for Atomic Scope. So I think as a takeaway question, we can kind of hook you up with that team for a bit more lower level detail. But to me, Atomic Scope's focused around the use cases of people still using BizTalk, still using BizTalk 360, and still using Atomic Scope. We think that when you move to Azure integration services, at the same time, you're likely to move to Serverless 360, and you're going to move to BAM. And I think our vision would be that you would probably migrate from Atomic Scope to Serverless 360 BAM as part of that AIS migration, and then you would have everything in one place. Sri, do you want to add anything to that? Do you think that's kind of pretty much in line with what you think?
Yes, Mike, yeah. I think you covered it all.
Right, so here in my Synapse, I've got my pipelines. If anyone's not familiar with Synapse, so Synapse is very similar to Data Factory. I've got a really good YouTube video. I say really good, I'll let other people say if it's good or not. I think be a bit more modest there, probably. I've got this video that talks about Synapse pipelines versus Data Factory. So if you want to learn a bit more about the differences in one versus the other, go and check that out. I've actually also got a video about Logic apps versus Data Factory if you want to compare those kind of things. But really, the design is similar to Data Factory. It's about processing bigger data sets. And what I can do in Synapse is I've got this web activity here, so you can basically make an HTTP call. So here I can make an HTTP call out by configuring a URL, some data, some headers. That'll go and send an event to BAM, and then I'll basically get an ID back. And then as I process my work, I can just use the web activity to send updates to BAM to tell me what's going on. And then here, if you see here, we've got the option of having an error pushed to BAM if this activity fails or if it succeeds. So it's really easy with this web activity to just push that data and update BAM. Right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just speed up a little bit and focus more on the architecture side. I think we've shown a lot of the cool features and want to get across the kind of the key messages. So here we've got Power Automate. So we think this will be a really good use case for people because Power Automate monitoring is difficult. So we've got a business user who wants to trigger a document for a customer when Dataverse gets updated. We think that Power Automate was chosen because it's in the Power Platform ecosystem. It's all Office 365 integration. The problem is the business user has no visibility of what was happening. So here we've got this, what we think would be an AI type interface, probably implemented with Logic apps or functions, which updates data about rail cars into my Dataverse. when the rail car gets delivered, the Power Platform team who build the Dynamics sales app, they've got a Power Automate flow that triggers when it says, right, this rail car's been delivered, trigger the flow. We'll get some data from the Dataverse. We get a template from SharePoint. We generate the document, and then we send it to the customer over email. So that confirms their rail car got delivered. It's kind of like a receipt. Now, the problem we get is the customer manager over here gets frustrated because he has customers who contact him and say, I haven't received my document. What happened? The customer manager has no idea because he has no visibility to the flow. He raises a support ticket. The support team come in, they check the Power Automate flow, and they realize, oh, for some reason, the SharePoint template file got renamed. We've got a bunch of documents that fail, or there was some bug in the Power Automate flow. It failed, but nobody knew until the customer told us there was a problem. So this is something where we see this as a big problem for Power Platform customers and Dynamics customers, is having visibility of these background processes. So here we can use Serverless 360, and we can have the user can send data to Serverless 360, just telling us how far through the process we get. The customer manager, the first thing he can do is when he gets asked, where's my document, he can go and check BAM. He might be able to reprocess it if it's an error that he can just fix themselves. His team can give genuine first call resolution to a customer by just reprocessing the document. But actually we can start spinning this round the other way, where BAM can start telling the customer service team, one of your customer documents failed, can you go and check it? A lot of the time in this kind of scenario, the bit that probably failed is going to be either getting the data or generating the document. Maybe the customer doesn't have an address on their records, the document fails to generate, some kind of problem like that, where we can proactively get the customer team to go and fix the issue. Likewise, we can also, in addition to the alerting, if he does need to escalate, the support team can go in, and they don't need to be Power Platform experts. It's really, for the support team, it's about these skill sets, especially that first line support. They don't need to know expertise in logic apps, functions, API, Power Automate, all these different technologies. They just manage the business process, become familiar with how to fix common problems and reduce the amount of escalations. So in Power Automate, and again, we've got a more detailed video for this one coming out soon. So here what I'm doing is I'm creating a connection in my environment. And you can see down here, I've got my BAM connection, so I could just import the Swagger for BAM, creates a connection for me, and then in my flow, it's my truck confirmation one. So you can see here, I've got this start transaction shape that would just send data to BAM. Actually, there's quite an interesting one here for Power Automate. I'll just see if I can find it. One of the interesting ones with Power Automate is if you're doing a Dataverse triggered flow, quite often it's a bit more complicated than just saying, has the truck arrived? You're triggering on a field change, so sometimes you need to ignore duplicates. So in this case, the truck hasn't arrived, so I ignore the flow, which means 90% of the runs of this flow are when the car's been updated, but it hasn't arrived yet. So that if you look at the run history, there's actually loads of these runs that are not really for this interface. They're more just ignoring data. So that, if you think of the run history for a support user, 9 out of 10 of these runs you don't care about, but you have to like search through them all. Where with BAM, if I go over to my truck tracker documents, so you can see here, got generate a document from CRM to the customer email. You can see I've got some product data about the truck and stuff, and I could open it up and you can see these are running in Power Automate, and I can see a bit of info about the here I've saved a message from Dataverse. If you really wanted to see that, you might choose to save that as a message body, but you can see the steps that it went through to help that troubleshooting. So In the interest of time for wrapping up, so I'm going to skip through a couple of slides here. So we're going to be doing more deeper dive videos on each of these demos. So keep an eye out for our YouTube video where we'll look through how to use all the different technologies. What we really wanted to do is deep dive today on the serverless features, as well as look at some of the demos. So we've got ones with API management. We've got a data factory one. So wrapping up with the key points. So for serverless 360, the key thing here is we want this centralized business and operations view. So with Azure, with Power Platform, regardless of the components, you have this fragmented view of your components. You've got different things happening in different places. That makes it really difficult to get that centralized view. And actually from a customer perspective, that's what they want. They want centralized management, but decentralized execution. And at the minute, we have decentralized execution and decentralized management. By having this centralized view, we can then open up self-service. So that's where we let business users, we empower them to manage their own transactions. We reduce support tickets by doing that. We empower the support team to be able to do more than just escalate a call to the next level. They can actually go and see what's going on, troubleshoot. It's across the entire AIS estate. So really it doesn't just need to be AIS. BAM's not just logic apps, it can be all the other different component types, it can be data factories, etc. We'll look at that in a minute. These are the key features we open up from the perspective of day-to-day operations: track and trace, action required, repair and resubmit. We have the dashboards we looked at the failure monitoring, query monitoring, duration, etc. So when we think about serverless 360 from the perspective of what resources can send to it, we've looked at logic apps, we've looked at Power Automate, we touched on Synapse. Time-wise, we haven't really had time to look at these, but we'll do more videos about them. But they're all common things. People are regularly pushing events to serverless 360. I mentioned the BAM pack, and we'll be doing a bit more of a deep dive video about that. It's also in the integrate videos. So we've got a session where we talk a bit more about this pack. What if you don't use logic apps or AIS though? So this is, I think, a really good thing for companies to think about, is BAM as a concept of managing your business transactions doesn't just mean you do an integration, or it might mean you do an integration with a different vendor. So if you're building an application, you might have background processes executing functions in APIs that you want to be able to have this holistic view of what's going on. So if you're on Azure and you're building an app, you can send events. Your app might be being built in different technologies. So if you're, .NET's easy. If you're Java, Node, Python, that's just as easy to send your events as well. But also, I think there's other things. What if you're an IT admin and you've got some PowerShell where you need, it's a really important PowerShell to the business, but you've got no monitoring of the script running. You've got no way to communicate to the support team about problems. You can send BAM events from a PowerShell script with an HTTP call, or you could even do it with something like a DevOps pipeline. If we have, some kind of support process that runs in a DevOps pipeline, it's quite common that a DevOps team would do that. Well, you can just send an HTTP call from the DevOps pipeline to update BAM about what's going on, which means you can let your support team can kind of can track and troubleshoot that common support task, and it doesn't have to be a high-cost DevOps expert who's the only one who can monitor it. Also, if we have other vendors, so let's say your SAP BTP, your Amazon, MuleSoft, anything that can make an HTTP call can use serverless 360 BAM. So it might be that you're an Azure customer, you use SAP BTP's integration suite, you're monitoring other stuff with serverless 360 on Azure. Your SAP BTP team could use BAM and open up all the features we've talked about today. If you would like a demo where we can talk about your requirements, a little bit more about the scenarios that you're trying to implement, or you want to learn a bit more about BAM or any of our other modules, reach out to our team. There's a QR code here for people to use if you want to. We'd love to have a chat to you, even if it's just to learn about the problems that you have in monitoring solutions in the real world, that would be really good for us. Hopefully you would like to know more about the product and try a demo of it. In addition to the product, we do lots of community activities as well. So calling out serverless notes, we've got loads of really great tips from experts from all over the world where we've just collected good things to help people build great solutions. We also have the Integrate Summit. So this was like a month ago now. So we had about 400 or 500 people got together in London. There was a whole bunch of people online. Microsoft talking about their roadmap, their strategies, their latest innovations, community members talking about real world problems and how to solve them. The videos are available online. Sri, do you want to mention anything about the sign up at this point? You basically go to that event, that link, and you'll be able to sign up. And I think, is there a cost for people if they want to access those videos or anything? I'm not sure.
Yes, Mike. So whenever anyone wants to access those videos, they can come on and they can purchase those videos.
So go and check those out there. You know, I think we have previous year videos on YouTube as well, and via the website. So if you wanted to check out the quality of those videos, you can go and check previous years and get an idea of what to expect from those videos. But there were some excellent sessions at Integrate.
Yeah, a point admin. So if anyone wants to access the CS Integrate video, the URL has been provided in the chat. They can get the URL from the chat as well. And right after this webinar, we can also send out an mail with this video links.
So I think there's a couple of questions in the chat, Sri. I'll just go through these quickly. So if you have multiple applications, is it possible to give the business user only permission to the application they are responsible for and don't see the other apps? Yeah, basically yes. We've got quite a complex capability for role-based security, so it can be set up where it's just fairly simple, where people have basic permissions, but you can also go really complicated if you need to. So for example, in this scenario here, I could set up Sri Hari to only have access to parts of this tree. So he may choose to only have access to the HR person sync interface. And you can also control the actions that he could do. So you can see you can review, you can read, you can resubmit, and there's a few other different role choices there. So yes, you can do all of the things that you would want to do there. The license model for BAM. So how is it licensed? BAM's based on the number of events. I think Sri Hari's shared the pricing page in the chat there. So basically we buy bundles of events. So you might buy 100,000 events, that'll have an associated cost. And then you use those events based on your components. So let's say Logic Apps sends 100,000 events. That's how you would send them. Now you can use those events from anywhere. You could use them from Power Automate, Data Factory, etc. There's no cost for things like the number of users as a common problem. So I guess other vendors may cost based on users as well. So if you've got 10 people in your support team or 100 people in your support team, that doesn't matter. For BAM, it's just based on how many events that you need. Is it possible to do hybrid BizTalk AIS monitoring like Atomic Skull? Yes. So really BAM exposes an API. Anything you can call that API from, then you can send BAM events. So if you had what example, if you go back to my slide, I'm going to just try and get this slide up actually, just to talk about it. So let's say here, right, from a hybrid perspective, so I've done a lot of videos and talks about things like BizTalk and BizTalk to AIS migration. Now, one of the biggest competitors for BizTalk historically was .NET Custom Code. Right? So this guy here, .NET Custom Code. So the number of organizations where they're thinking about BizTalk, but they ended up writing console apps and web services and IAS and all those other things which were really custom developed integrations. One of the big challenges that those customers had was they didn't have all of the BizTalk management and monitoring capabilities with them. Now, what's quite likely is those customers are still going to be supporting those solutions for periods of time, but they may also move to AIS for some of those integration requirements. Now, it's absolutely feasible. You could have a console app send a BAM event to serverless 360 from your .NET code. Whether you do that, if it's old code, you might just use HTTP client. If it's newer code, you could use our .NET library. Even if as I said, if it was a PowerShell script, you could do it from there as well. It's really, BAM's intended to be easy to use. So any code that you've got where you really want to look for that use case of, can I make the support team or a business self-service user support this business transaction rather than my IT expert because they cost a lot more money? That's really where you would look to use BAM. I think that's just about all the questions, Sri. Is there any other bits you guys want to mention before? I think we're just over time, I think.
All the questions are covered, Mike. So I think we are good.
Perfect. We hope everybody's enjoyed today's session. I think there'll be a recording that'll come out within a week or so, usually for these webinars, so you'll be able to access it via the Covai website. Otherwise, we hope everybody has an awesome day. We'd love to have a chat with you about some of the stuff you've seen today. Otherwise, take care. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike. It was really a great session. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day then.